In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about the null and alternate hypothesis and how to interpret results of a hypothesis test. We will determine whether the following claim represents the null or alternate hypothesis. If a hypothesis test is performed, how should you interpret a decision that A, rejects the null hypothesis, or B, fails to reject the null hypothesis? The claim is this. A market research group claims that the mean amount of time 18 to 24-year-olds spend on social media is at least 10 hours a week. I know that the phrase "at least" corresponds to the mathematical symbol greater than or equal to. Since the symbol greater than or equal to contains an equality statement, I know that it must go in the null hypothesis, because the null hypothesis is the hypothesis which contains the statement of equality. So the null hypothesis is that mu is greater than or equal to 10. Our alternate hypothesis is the complement to our null, and so our alternate hypothesis is that mu is less than 10. So since our claim contains the statement of equality, we know that it resides in the null hypothesis. So how should you interpret a decision that rejects the null hypothesis? Recall that we reject the null hypothesis if our probability value that we calculate is less than a significance level alpha. For the purposes of this problem, we don't really need to know what the p-value or alpha are, but we need to understand under what circumstances do we reject the null. And what does it mean to reject the null? Since we reject the null hypothesis, we know that our p-value must be less than our significance level. And since our claim happens to reside in the null hypothesis, if we are rejecting the null, then we must be rejecting the claim as well. In other words, there is sufficient evidence to reject the claim that the mean amount of time 18 to 24-year-olds spend on social media is at least 10 hours a week. There is sufficient evidence to reject the claim that the mean amount of time is at least 10 hours per week. Now, how should you interpret a result that fails to reject the null? Well, again, in our case, the claim resides in the null. So if we fail to reject the null, then we must be supporting the claim. In other words, there is not sufficient evidence to reject the claim that the mean amount of time 18 to 24-year-olds spend on social media is at least 10 hours per week. So again, there is insufficient evidence to reject the claim. We are failing to reject the null, and since the null contains the claim in this problem, we are accepting the claim and stating that it's supported by our sample evidence. So this is just a very brief overview of how to interpret the null and alternate hypothesis for a specific scenario. I hope you found the example helpful, and we'll see you next time.